we have a good performance in this. The study was for maximum 10 weeks, a longer period of observation. So, always the result of the study. Emoled and the standard of care only, you get to see that at the end, the remaining wound area was 42% in Emoled group, and in control group was 63%. But in this study, we can observe that we start to have some difference, and the same observation was possible in the study of biomarker. So we have difference between venous, arterial, or other ulcers. What is the first line is that maybe that this type of treatment work on inflammation. The pain reduction that is always reported in all the group. So the conclusion in the group study was treatment with Emoled in a dot addition enhanced revitalization, particularly on venous leg ulcers, same result of the and the action of pain was really evident. So rapidly on our experience of 50 patients, because the other presenter was connected, we have this result. One case drop. The observation was for only 4 weeks, treatment 1 weeks for 2 weeks. And we have this number of cases: 19 venous, 9 arterial, 12 inflammatory, and 9 other. So you can note that after 4 weeks, we have a good number 11 resolution. And we have an improvement on the good bad score this year. And also about isolated, you can see that we have a reduction. 1, 2, 3. Obviously, here. This was the global performance. Then we have more than 70% of positive results per month. If we look to etiology, we can observe that the best result is venous and on inflammatory. So, if we are going to what's happened in the area, we are talking about 4 weeks of observation. Short time. In 4 weeks of observation, we have a general result of reduction of 33% versus 34%. But we are going to do what's happened in the area. Obviously, start from different area. At T0 time, we have the best reduction in the smaller wounds, but also if we look at age, down from 6 months, we have a reduction that is close to 60%. So small ulcers that have an age not longer than 6 months. And from etiology, these are venous, 40%. Inflammatory ulcers and also inflammatory ulcers. So what's happening? When I have inflammation, because normally the literature said treat very old ulcers that don't ulcer. Maybe that in the future we started to treat further. The pain was reduced also in our experience. What is the take-home message? This is a charity. This is not a dress. You don't dress with light, but we still need to better understand some things, indication, doses, and time. Thanks for your attention, and I leave space for the presenter.
Thank you, Ian. So we will be able to manage the remote presentation, and we will continue with another Italian scientist from the Research National Council in Italy, Dr. Francesca Tappini, is going to appear online live with her presentation. Dr. Tappini is a physics compartment physician and researcher. We have a little computer on the chair because there are 80 remote participants attending the session. Any question for Dr. Ricci or myself from the audience? Why do you do it? Okay. So this is Dr. Tanga. We're going to start with the third speaker from Singapore. Any question for Dr. Ricci? Elia, I have a question for you. In your experience, looking at the patients, in your procedure of application of light, did you had any, I like to say, follow-up on recurrences, or did you manage to apply the light even on closed wounds, just to have a skin effect? What do you think?
That's a good question. The problem was because during COVID was to check patients.
Is everybody hearing me?
We can hear you.
If you hear me, may I go ahead with my presentation? Because I cannot hear you, so I don't know if I may. Can you hear me? May I also share my screen with you? Okay, now I see myself. Okay, I hope that you're hearing me. Sounds like you do, because I cannot hear you anymore. So maybe that means that it's on me now. And I am going to speak about the photobiomodulation experimental evidences that have been obtained with the Emoled treatment. The strategy that has been designed is a very simple and yet a very effective one. So the goal from the beginning was to maximize the absorption in the blood and inside the cells, with the choice of a specific wavelength which targets the hemoglobin and the cytochrome C. As you can see in this graph, there is a peak in the hemoglobin and cytochrome C spectra, which is targeted by the blue light. The specificity of the light source is ideal to maximize hemoglobin absorption in comparison with the other common absorbers that we have in the skin. Melanin, above all of them, was a concern that has been addressed with the choice of a wavelength that is preferentially absorbed by hemoglobin and cytochrome C. So the blue light is first absorbed by the hemogroup and, most importantly, for clinical application by cytochrome C, and elicits not only a thermal effect, but a range of biochemical effects that I'm going to describe. But first, I want to remind that the first parameters that had to be set were the power density of the treatment and the ideal exposure times. So as you can see in the graph, which represents the combination of these two parameters, the right range that avoids tissue ablation and disruption and supports the photochemical interaction is where we have a combination of an exposure longer than a millisecond and a power density which is lower than 1,000 watt per square centimeters. So after these ideal conditions were found, we started to perform our experiments in animal models that were rats undergone superficial bleeding abrasions. And well, of course, in the bleeding wound, the blue light is mainly absorbed by hemoglobin. In fact, as you can see, also in a blood droplet, a coagulation effect is elicited even in hemophiliac blood. This is a photothermal effect that leads to coagulation, and it also happens in the tissue, but in the tissue, it is enhanced, and the most important part is the biochemical process, which depends on the cytochrome absorption and the consequential effects on the electron transport chain, and thus on the ATP production and modulation. As a result, the treated wounds were healing faster and better, and the fibroblasts and the myofibroblast cells densities in the treated wounds were going back to the control level much earlier if compared with the not treated ones. And this effect was assessed by revealing the cell types with fluorescent markers and was later quantified by counting the cells. So the microscopic effect was observed visually and by measuring the wound area, while the microscopic effect were studied by means of histological studies. As you can see in this picture, we had different phototype, animal of different phototype, and we had similar results in all of them. And you can see that after 4 days and 6 days, the treated wound was healing much better. So these results that were first assessed with histology were then confirmed by a wider range of cell markers. In particular, we found that the inflammatory infiltrate in the first phase of the wound repairing was initially enhanced by the treatment and then brought back to normal levels. This is consistent with the idea of a faster healing process triggered by the blue light. Two important facts to underline in this set of experiments are the peak in the degranulation, but not in the density of mast cells, and this is one of the cause of the overall higher presence of the inflammatory infiltrate in the first phase of the wound healing. And the second element is the neutrophils number being already decreased after 24 hours, while in the not treated wound it is still high. So all these data are consistent with a time shift hypothesis in which the blue light is able to anticipate the common steps of the wound healing process. And also, the tissues were used with two advanced microscopy techniques, which are two photon fluorescence and second harmonic generation, that showed an improved in collagen deposition in the treated wounds. And there is also a strong similarity between the treated wounds and the healthy skin, while the untreated wound is still not healed completely. So after our experiments with the animal model, we still had two main questions to be answered. One is, which is the mechanism of action inside the cell? And the other one is, does this mechanism differ in between different cell types? And in particular, is it different between healthy cells and pathological ones? So from the point of view of the mechanism inside the cell, we knew from the literature that the blue light affects the cytochrome C, and this leads to three big modulation, which are one of the ATP production, the ROS production, and the nitric oxide. We're not yet investigating the nitric oxide. The ROS production is under investigation right now, and we have already assessed the effects of the blue light on the cytochrome and thus in the ATP production and thus in the metabolism of the cell. The other chain that could be explored was the effect on the cell membrane, and in particular in the cell membrane channels. So we did try to study both of these intercellular pathways, and we did it with both healthy and pathological cells to answer the two questions that we had. And so to do that, we had tissues from keloids, perilesional keloid, and healthy skin. And we compared the results of all of these different kind of cells, also with the ACAT cell line, which is a cell line commonly used in the studies for wound repair. And we used a range of different techniques from confocal microscopy to wound healing assay. And so starting from the beginning, starting from the smallest part of the story, we did some studies in the cytochrome C Raman spectra. As you can see in the bottom line, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but anyway, in the bottom line of the graph, you can see the cytochrome C spectra, and you can see that there is a peak in the black line, which is much higher, and that peak is typical of the Raman spectra of the cytochrome C, and it is the spectra shift that we have when the cytochrome C is reduced. So indeed, this is what happened in the cytochrome C itself when it is treated with Emoled. The same effect is achieved if we treat the whole cell, the whole fibroblast, but it doesn't happen in the keratinocyte. So there are differences in the answer of the cells to the treatment, and these may be due to the fact that the different cells live at different depth inside the skin. So maybe in terms of evolution, there is some kind of adaptation which is different from the several types of cells that have a different answer to the light. So the natural follow-up for this experiment was to see what happens to the metabolism, because if we do affect the cytochrome C, this has to be seen at some point in the metabolism of the cell. So this is exactly what happened. After 24 hours of the treatment, the metabolism of healthy fibroblasts is enhanced. Then if the fluence is too high, the metabolism actually decreases, and that probably indicates some kind of damage. But luckily, the fluence that we do have, that we use for the treatment is the lighter one. So we do have in healthy fibroblasts an enhancement of the metabolism, and we have no effect in proliferation. The same happens after 48 hours, and consistently with what we had seen in the cytochrome C spectra, we had no effect in the metabolism after 24 hours of the keratinocytes. So then we wanted to see the meaning of this changing in metabolism in an experimental set that was mimicking the wound. So we put together keratinocytes and fibroblasts in a petri dish, and we did a co-culture because they live together in the tissue, and so they cannot live by themselves in the petri dish. They die because the crosstalk between these two kind of cells is very important. And so we kept them in a petri dish together, and we did a co-culture, and then we performed a scratch in the petri dish. And we watched what was happening after the treatment, and we could see that in the treated sample after 24 hours and especially after 48 hours, the scratch was completely closed. So the fibroblasts were enhanced in their metabolism. They were more able to close the scratch. Then we performed. Oh my God, what is this? What is this? That was not my voice. I'm sorry. There was maybe some kind of voice in here. Okay. I will try to show you in this way. I think it will work anyway. So then we performed some electrophysiological studies, and we could see that there is a current that is due to the Emoled treatment. And this current was elicited 3 minutes after the treatment, and it was only present in the keloid fibroblasts, not present in the healthy cells. So once again, we had the demonstration that there are differences in between what happened with the healthy cells and the pathological ones. So in conclusion, the photobiomodulation by blue light improves wound healing in vivo, modulating the inflammatory infiltrate and the collagen deposition, induced a redox change in cytochrome C, increases the ramp-evoked outward currents only in keloid fibroblasts, and at low fluence stimulates cell metabolism in healthy fibroblasts, while high fluence affects cell viability. And more importantly, the blue light stimulates the scratch closure in the wound healing assay. So these are all the pieces of the puzzle that we have been building over the years. And the big picture is the one that you have seen and probably will see also later in the clinical studies, which are now totally represented both in the animal study and in the biochemical mechanisms underlying the blue light effect. And here is another big picture. These are all the people that have been working on this project. And I thank you for your attention. I guess now I can. Okay. I don't know if you can still hear me and see me, because unfortunately I cannot hear you and see you, but I hope you did. And if you have any questions, I'm here.
Okay. We have the new next speaker connected, who's Dr. Tang, Dr. Tiong Tang from Singapore. Is going to present the Singapore experience so far for blue light photoregulation, photobiomodulation. Few seconds.
A very good evening from Singapore. Can you hear me all right?
You verify? No. Okay, that's coming. Yes, they can hear you.
Can you hear me? Hello? Okay. Thank you. I'm going to make a start. Is that okay? So I've been asked to give a talk on the use of blue light therapy from Singapore, and we've been using this very much on our venous ulcers, which present very late in our population of patients. So these are my disclosures relevant to this talk. And first of all, I would like to thank the committee for giving me this opportunity to give this talk. And I think this is a very exciting piece of disruptive technology that actually is giving us an extra armamentarium to our wound healing armory. As an introduction, non-healing wounds are a big problem. Basically, the use of this photobiomodulation, you've heard about the basic science using non-ionizing light, and there's basically therapeutic applications in the red and blue light range. Basically, use of photons, I think from specific blue light wavelength, basically attacks the inflammatory phase, can cause vasodilatation, angiogenesis, and granulation for the wound healing cycle. It activates fibroblasts and nitric oxide release. And there's good evidence now really from dermatology in the treatment of acne, burns, and psoriasis, and also positive impact on venous leg ulcers. And I think there's beginning to be some evidence for the use of diabetic foot ulcers as well. Next slide, please. So you'll see this slide with the Emoled blue light therapy, what we've been using. It basically emits a blue light from its source at a wavelength between 400 and to 430 nanometers. You can see that the photons from the blue light wavelength stimulate wound healing. And there's no point in me going back into more of the basic science, as this was covered in the previous couple of talks, especially the last talk. And I think the Blur study was covered, and basically it's shown a positive experience for non-healing ulcers that have been there for a month. Next slide. So I'm just going to give you some case presentations of some bad leg ulcers that we've had in Singapore, especially in my practice in Singapore General Hospital. Next slide. So the first case is a 71-year-old Chinese male, medical history, on background of chronic venous insufficiency, has had recurrent bilateral lower limb venous ulcers for the last 4 years. Basically, the average treatment time is between 2 to 3 months on 4-layer compression dressings with weekly visits to the hospital. Previous history of deep vein